My name's Margaret O'Hara and I'm a trustee of Long COVID Support, which is a charity registered in England and Wales that supports people with long COVID. I've had long COVID myself since March 2020, and I've been working with a number of investigators who are doing research on long COVID. And what we're doing today is talking to Tim Nicholson, who is leading on a study called PC-COS, which stands for Post-COVID Core Outcome Set. And the purpose of the video is just to explain a little bit about it and to introduce the idea, because at the moment we're asking people with long COVID to get involved in the study and to rate some ways of measuring long COVID for future research. So Tim, could I just ask you to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks for the opportunity to explain a bit more about this study. So I'm a neuropsychiatrist at King's College London, and I run one of the long COVID clinics at King's College Hospital in South East London for the last year and a half. I've also got a background in outcome measure research and have been doing research into COVID, both acute COVID, neurological and brain effects, as well as long COVID research in other areas. But as you mentioned, I co-lead a large international team with broad expertise across all aspects of outcome measurements themselves and also long COVID and COVID in other settings. So this is the PC-COS study, as you've mentioned, and we're doing it in collaboration with the World Health Organization, several other big international studies, and we're funded by the NIHR, which is the National Institute for Healthcare Research in the UK, so the research wing of the NHS essentially. So thanks for allowing me to explain a bit more about this study.
And just to say that even though it's funded by the NIHR in the UK, it has international reach, and it's expected to have international reach with the involvement of WHO and other large organizations. So could you explain a little bit about it, because people might not understand what is a core outcome set?
Yes, thanks. So it's actually, in some ways, it's quite a simple thing, but it's a very critical thing for how we develop evidence about treatments and about how to measure a particular disorder. So left to their own devices, lots of researchers come up with different ways of measuring things, different things to measure, in fact, especially in something as complicated as long COVID, with lots of different features. So this is really a way of getting everybody to agree, of all stakeholders, so whether it's patients, carers, researchers and clinicians and funders even sometimes, to sort of really agree on what's the minimum set of things we should measure in long COVID. And it's expected that people might measure more than that if it's particularly relevant to them, but it's really defining this minimum set of things, and that allows us to accelerate the development of treatments and evidence, because we can compare and collate data much more efficiently.
So that would be, when you say things, you mean symptoms and other outcomes related to that, like maybe your function and your quality of life and that kind of thing. Exactly. And I've already been involved with you for quite a while in the first set of work. This is a follow-on. What you're doing at the moment is part 2. So could you explain a bit about part 1 and what you did there?
Yeah, thank you. So part 1 was a survey. Many people, some people watching this might have taken part in the first survey, which where we got all these stakeholders, so the patients, carers, professionals, as either clinicians or researchers, to rate what aspects of long COVID are the core features. And of course, that's quite complicated with long COVID. But we managed to achieve consensus in a big study we ran last autumn, which we got over 1,500 participants, over half of which were patients with people with long COVID, and including some carers as well, and from over 70 countries. So it's a very broad, and that's a large number for this sort of study, but we know it's also a complicated disorder, and we need lots of people to achieve the best possible sort of views of everybody on what we should be measuring. So we managed to do that after having identified all the outcomes people are measuring in current and future studies. So that was quite a big piece of work, and that's actually just being published this week in Lancet Respiratory, and there'll be a podcast which we can put in the link below as well, which will have a bit about that particular study if people want to read more about it.
So the outcome of that was that there were 11 things which were felt to be the absolute basic minimum. Yeah. And now the next stage is to say, okay, we as a community have decided that you've got to measure these things. Now, how are we going to measure them?
Exactly. So there were 11 things over and above one which we used from the a similar core outcome set for acute COVID, which was recovery. So whether someone, a sort of basic assessment was whether someone's recovered to another 11 things. And as you say, those are across different sort of symptoms and other aspects, functioning, etc. Yeah. So the next stage is to work out how to measure those particular outcomes. So this is the slightly more complicated, detailed part where we do a similar sort of review of everything that's been used in current studies or is planned in studies where they've published their protocols online. So we can see what people are either doing now or about to, or have done, or what they're about to do, and then how they've, what measures they've selected. So we're going to present those to all these stakeholders within a similar sort of Delphi study, so a round of studies where you get people to rate things and then see how other people rate it, and you've got the opinion, you've got the chance to change your view and try and achieve consensus on, because everyone's going to have slightly different views on what the best thing is. So it's really that same iterative process within an online survey.
So this is another two-stage process where, to begin with, you rate these instruments, and then that all gets boiled down, and then you get presented again with the results, and you get an opportunity to see whether you agree with them.
Exactly. And this
like what happened in the first time.
Exactly. The only other slight difference is it's a three-stage process, because we've got the facility here to add in measures that people suggest. Any stakeholder can suggest a measure that's not already identified and say, well, actually, well, have you considered doing this? So we can, if enough people suggest something that's appropriate for that outcome, we can add that in. So there's an extra stage where we're doing that, and then so yes, but that's I think important to know, because if there is something there that you know someone thinks should be added in, you can suggest it. Okay,
so this is slightly more complex than the first time, because you will be, as a person taking part in this, you'll be presented with a whole range of different outcome measures, and these outcome measures, they're generally questionnaires or rating scales and things like that. And so there are a lot of them because there are a lot of symptoms. Could you give an example? Could you show us what that might look like for people who are taking part and what they might be presented with?
And I can show you hopefully just an example of one of these cards. So basically we've made instrument card of an outcome measure. So we have the outcomes, and then you have the outcome measures which measure those outcomes. So it gets a bit sort of confusing, but these are the outcome measures themselves. So this is one which is to measure physical function, and hopefully you can see it now on your screen. So it's really just a page. Some of them are a bit more complicated. I've chosen one of the sort of mid-level complexity. There are some which are quite simple and some which are a bit more complicated, but it's really between 1 and 2 pages of information. And a lot of this information can be quite technical, because it's obviously lots of professionals need to rate it, but also patients. So we've got a sort of plain language summary that you can see in the grey box near the top, and that sort of gives you the key headline features of that measure. So for example, how long it takes to complete, and sort of hopefully something that can make sense about what it's trying to capture, and give you an idea of what it's doing, and then you can see whether this is something that feels like something that's measuring that aspect of long COVID well for you. And then you can also click on these hyperlinks within the card. So these will be shown within the survey.
And can you see the actual instrument itself?
Yeah. Yes. So it should be coming up now, hopefully on your screen. So this is the example of this survey. So it's about physical function. This one's quite a simple one. Some are a bit more detailed, but there's a big range. And also some of the instruments cards you'll be shown are for something that measures one outcome. Some measures cover multiple outcomes, and some are COVID specific, because people are starting to develop COVID-19 or long COVID specific outcome measures. So there's a range of complexity, but this is one that's sort of moderately complicated. And the other thing, sorry, I should point out, is that there's a glossary. So if there's any terms that are unfamiliar to people, they can click on those and try and to get to grips with anything that's sort of if it's a phrase or a word within these cards that doesn't not immediately obvious. So I think that was the main things, just to show what people have to do within the survey itself.
And I wanted to point out as well that these instrument cards have been developed with people with long COVID, myself and others, and we're walking a line between trying to simplify quite complex information, but not simplify it too much that you lose the details. So we have come up with this as a sort of compromise, and a lot of the technical information isn't relevant necessarily for people with long COVID. So if you just wanted to look at the plain English summary and go straight to the instrument itself, and then point on the card. And also, it's true that they are randomized, so not everybody needs to do everything.
That's correct, because we firstly, we've got just over 50 of these measures we need to show to people all across these 11 outcomes, and some of them are quite complicated, some of them are quite relatively simple, so they're randomized, so that if people don't manage to finish the whole thing, we still get if everybody does, they'll all be shown different ones first, so even if you get through a bit, that's super helpful. We're also fully aware that obviously energy levels, fatigue, and brain fog and cognitive issues are a sort of major issue in long COVID. So we'd expect this sort of to be the case. But so really just doing what you can is incredibly valuable. And as you've mentioned, to not feel that if there's bits within that more complex detail that you need to get into that, and it's really just do what you can. That's what's required. Also, if you don't feel that this is an aspect of long COVID you have, or you feel is something you can comment on, you can just say unable to rate this particular measure, and you can skip on to the next one. So I think that's also important to get across.
Yeah, thanks. And could you say a little bit then about how these have been selected? So you've mentioned there's about 50 different instruments. How have these been selected out of all the instruments that are out there?
Yeah, so this is using the sort of standard ideal methodology, which tries to be as objective as it can be. And we go through, again, similarly to what we did with identifying the outcomes that we are measuring within this, we identify all the measures that are currently being used or planned to being used within long COVID studies. So it's really a sort of rigorous, systematic approach to developing stuff. But again, as we've mentioned, we expect that people might be aware of or suggest other things that they can put forward. So that's why we have this other further step. So it's really a sort of it's a sort of hypothesis-free zone. We're really taking what's been used and just putting it in there for everyone to rate.
And people with long COVID will continue to be involved throughout the study as they have been since the beginning. So I know that people from Long COVID SOS, Body Politic, Long COVID Support, and other organisations have already been working with you on this, and they are very aware of lots of the new instruments that are coming up. So I'm sure that capacity to suggest things will be really welcome and really useful.
I think just also point out that even though this will be what people use for a while, we particularly for a new condition, a core outcome set is always being sort of, there's always the possibility when there's funding and resources to do it, to revisit it and update it as we learn more about the condition. So I think that's worth stating as well, that it's not going to be set in stone forever. Yeah. This is just to get us, this is a critical phase of the first trials and things being set up, that we get something out there and we've done this with pretty much the optimal methodology, doing it as fast as we can, because we know there's such an urgent need to develop treatments for this condition.
Yeah, so in the fullness of time, there may be long COVID specific instruments developed and they can be incorporated into it.
And more of them, or we'll have more data on how they work and their relative merits than we do at the moment.
Yeah, so this is just to get us to a position where we can, out of what we've got so far, we can agree what are the best things. May not be perfect, but it's the best we've got, and we proceed from there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. If anyone does want to get in touch, then I would encourage you to. And for people with long COVID, it's really important that, as you say, as many people as possible do try. And even if you just rate one instrument, that is still going to be used. So absolutely anything that you can do will be used. You don't have to finish the whole thing off. So I would encourage people to take part.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention that there's a save for later, so it doesn't have to be done in one sitting. You can take as long as you want until the study finishes. So you can do it in lots of little 5-10 minute bursts, whatever it takes. And obviously there's a big variation in how quickly people can manage it, given sort of their energy and how their cognition's going and stuff. Yeah. So I think I should have made that before, but it's a critical point. But you can pause it and stop and pick it up as you go along.
Okay, so thanks very much for that, and nice to speak to you. this morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to explain a bit more about the study. Thank you, Margaret.